She was born into royalty but branded a failure, the daughter of the mighty alien king, yet deemed too soft for a warrior's crown. So in a desperate gamble, they sent her to the one place that forged monsters out of men, Earth. There, among ruins and discipline, she met a human. He didn't see a princess, only potential. What emerged from his training wasn't the same girl, it was something the galaxy wasn't ready for. This is the story of how a broken heir became a warrior queen, and how humanity changed the fate of an empire. The weight of a crown. The crystalline towers of Vorthon Prime scraped against 3 purple moons, their surfaces reflecting the eternal storms that raged in the planet's upper atmosphere. Within the highest spire, King Theron stood before the Council of Elders, his massive frame casting shadows across the polished floor. At nearly 9 feet tall, with skin like brushed silver and eyes that glowed amber in the dim light, he embodied everything a Vorthon ruler should be: powerful, imposing, and utterly unbreakable. Everything his daughter was not. Princess Zara sat in the corner of the grand chamber, her slight frame almost lost in the ornate chair designed for beings twice her size. While other Vorthon possessed the trademark silver skin and towering height of their species, Zara appeared almost translucent, her pale skin barely containing the faint luminescence that marked her royal bloodline. At what humans would consider 25 years old, she should have been in her prime, leading military campaigns and inspiring fear in the Empire's enemies. Instead, she could barely lift the ceremonial weapons of her ancestors. "Your Majesty," Elder Crick spoke, his voice resonating through the chamber like distant thunder. "The princess has failed the trials of strength for the 7th time. The people begin to question whether she is fit to inherit the throne." Theron's hands clenched into fists, each one capable of crushing steel. He had watched his beloved daughter struggle through combat training, strategic exercises, and physical challenges that other Vorthon younglings completed with ease. Every failure cut deeper than any blade, not because he was ashamed of Zara, but because he could see the pain in her eyes with each defeat. "She carries the royal bloodline," Theron replied, his voice carefully controlled. "That cannot be changed." "But her weakness can be," Elder Voss interjected, stepping forward. "There are treatments, genetic modifications that could enhance her physical capabilities. The science exists." Zara finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying surprising steel. "I will not be made into something I am not through artificial means." The chamber fell silent. It was the first time in months that the princess had spoken during a council session, and her words carried a dignity that surprised even her harshest critics. Elder Crick's expression softened slightly. "Princess, your noble intentions are admirable, but the Empire requires strength. Without it, you cannot protect our people." That night, alone in his private study, King Theron reviewed intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The Vorthon Empire had many enemies, and weakness in leadership could invite disaster. He loved his daughter deeply, but love alone could not shield her from the responsibilities of rule. As he scrolled through data on various species and their capabilities, one report caught his attention. It was a study on human resilience, compiled by Vorthon scouts who had observed Earth from a distance. The report described a species that, while physically unremarkable, possessed an almost supernatural ability to adapt and overcome seemingly impossible odds. Humans were individually weak compared to most galactic species, yet they had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. They turned disadvantages into strengths and found victory in the most hopeless situations. Most intriguingly, they seemed capable of transforming themselves through something they called training and mental conditioning. An idea began to form in Theron's mind, one so unconventional that it bordered on madness. 3 days later, a Vorthon diplomatic vessel entered Earth's solar system, transmitting a simple message to the planet's surface. They were seeking someone with a very specific skill set: the ability to train warriors from nothing. Marcus Reed was chopping firewood behind his cabin in the Montana wilderness when the message reached him. At 42, the former Army Special Forces instructor had spent the last 5 years in self-imposed exile, trying to forget the battles he had fought and the soldiers he had trained who never came home. His weathered hands, scarred from years of combat and manual labor, paused mid-swing as the alien communication device materialized in his yard. The holographic message was brief and to the point. The king of the Vorthon Empire required his services to train a student in the arts of warfare and leadership. The payment offered was beyond anything Marcus could have imagined, But what caught his attention was the desperation in the alien king's voice. Someone needed help, and despite his desire for isolation, Marcus Reed had never been able to turn away from someone in genuine need. When the Vorthon transport ship landed 3 days later, Marcus expected to meet another alien warrior seeking to polish already formidable skills. Instead, he found himself face to face with Princess Zara, who stepped carefully down the ship's ramp, her movements graceful but clearly labored in Earth's heavier gravity. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with features that seemed carved from moonlight and eyes that held depths of sadness Marcus recognized from his own mirror. But she was also clearly struggling with the simple act of walking, her breathing shallow as she adjusted to the planet's atmosphere. "You are Marcus Reed?" she asked, her voice carrying a musical quality despite its obvious strain. "That's right," Marcus replied, studying her carefully. "And you're the student I'm supposed to train?" Zara straightened, trying to project royal authority despite her obvious discomfort. "I am Princess Zara of Vorthon Prime. My father believes you can teach me to be strong." Marcus walked slowly around her, noting the way she favored her left side, the slight tremor in her hands, and the determined set of her jaw despite her physical struggles. He had trained hundreds of soldiers over the years, from fresh-faced recruits to hardened veterans seeking to push their limits further. But this was different. "What exactly does strong mean to your people?" he asked finally. "Physical power," Zara replied immediately. "The ability to crush enemies in combat, to inspire fear and respect through displays of raw strength. My people measure worth by how much weight you can lift, how many opponents you can defeat in single combat." Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand the challenge before him. "And you can't do those things." For a moment, Zara's composure cracked, and Marcus saw the pain she carried. "I am the weakest member of the royal family in over 1,000 years. I cannot even lift our ceremonial weapons, let alone wield them in battle. My own people call me the Glass Princess behind my back." "Glass, huh?" Marcus mused, leading her toward his cabin. "You know what's interesting about glass? It can be incredibly strong when it's tempered properly, and it can cut deeper than any blade when shaped right." Zara looked at him with confusion, not understanding the metaphor. "We'll start tomorrow," Marcus said simply. "But first you need to understand something. I'm not here to make you into what your people think you should be. I'm here to help you discover what you actually are." That evening, as Zara struggled to adjust to the cabin's basic accommodations, Marcus watched her through the window. She moved with careful precision, conserving energy and adapting to each new challenge with quiet determination. She didn't complain about the rough wooden furniture or the simple meal he had prepared. Instead, she observed everything with intelligent eyes, already beginning to analyze and adapt. Marcus smiled grimly. The Vorthon king had been right about one thing. His daughter did need training, but not the kind her people expected. What Princess Zara needed was to learn that true strength had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with the indomitable human spirit that could turn any disadvantage into a weapon. The real training would begin tomorrow, and Marcus suspected that by the time it was finished, the galaxy would discover that the Glass Princess was far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. As the Earth's single moon rose over the Montana mountains, both human and alien prepared for a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about strength, power, and what it truly meant to be a warrior. The transformation was about to begin. Forged in fire. The Montana dawn broke cold and unforgiving, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus had been awake for over an hour, preparing for what he knew would be the most challenging training assignment of his career. Through the cabin window, he could see Princess Zara sitting on the porch, her pale form almost ghost-like in the early morning mist. She hadn't slept well. The gravity, the atmospheric pressure, even the planet's electromagnetic field was different from her homeworld. But she was here, ready to begin, and that alone told Marcus something important about her character. "Ready for your first lesson?" he called out, stepping onto the porch with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Zara accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her delicate fingers around its warmth. "What will we be doing? Combat training? Weapons practice?" Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "We're going for a walk." The confusion on Zara's face was evident. "A walk, but I need to learn to fight, to be strong like my people expect." "Trust the process," Marcus said simply, leading her down a forest trail that wound through towering pine trees. "Tell me about your homeworld while we walk." As they moved slowly through the wilderness, Zara began to describe Vorthon Prime. She spoke of crystal cities that floated above perpetual storms, of her people's warrior culture where strength determined social status, and of the pressure she felt as the only heir to a throne she felt unworthy to claim. Marcus listened carefully, noting how her breathing became more labored as they climbed a gentle slope. But he also noticed something else, her keen observations about the forest around them, the way she instinctively chose the most efficient path when given the option, and her natural ability to conserve energy. "Stop," he said suddenly after they had been walking for 30 minutes. Zara halted immediately, grateful for the rest. Her skin had taken on a slight blue tinge, a sign of oxygen deprivation that Marcus had learned about from the medical data provided by her father. "What do you see?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the forest around them. Zara looked around, puzzled. "Trees, rocks, plants I don't recognize." "Look deeper. What does this environment tell you about survival?" For several minutes, Zara studied their surroundings with new eyes. Gradually, her expression changed as understanding dawned. "The trees grow differently here than they would in open ground. They compete for sunlight, so they grow tall and thin. The undergrowth is sparse because the canopy blocks most of the light. Water flows downhill, so there will be streams in the valleys." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Go on." "The animals here would need to be adapted for vertical movement and camouflage. Predators would use ambush tactics rather than direct confrontation because the terrain doesn't favor open pursuit." Zara's voice grew stronger as she warmed to the analysis. "This is an environment where intelligence and adaptation matter more than raw strength." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Your people measure strength by how much weight someone can lift or how many enemies they can crush in combat. But humans survived and thrived on Earth not because we were the strongest, but because we were the smartest. We learned to use tools, to work together, to adapt our strategies to our environment." They continued walking, and Marcus began to teach Zara the first principles of human warfare: observation, adaptation, and the efficient use of resources. He showed her how to read animal tracks, how to identify edible plants, and how to find water sources. Each lesson built upon the previous one, creating a foundation of knowledge that had nothing to do with physical strength. By the third day, Zara was beginning to understand. As they sat by a small stream, sharing a meal of fish that Marcus had taught her to catch using a simple trap, she asked the question he had been waiting for. "Why are you teaching me these things? My people will still expect me to prove myself in combat." Marcus leaned back against a fallen log, choosing his words carefully. "What's the most important quality a leader can have?" Zara considered this. "Strength? The ability to protect their people?" Close, but not quite right. "The most important quality a leader can have is the ability to make good decisions under pressure. Everything else, strength, speed, even courage, means nothing if you make the wrong choice at the critical moment." He picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt beside the stream. "Your people have built their entire culture around individual physical prowess. But what happens when they face an enemy they can't simply overpower?" The question hung in the air as Zara contemplated its implications. Her people's military history was filled with glorious victories won through superior strength and technology. But there had been defeats too, times when brute force wasn't enough. "They adapt or they die," she said quietly. "Exactly. And adaptation requires intelligence, creativity, and the willingness to abandon old ways of thinking. These are things you already possess, Zara. You just need to learn how to use them." The real transformation began in the second week. Marcus introduced physical training, but not the kind Zara expected. Instead of trying to build massive strength she would never possess, he focused on efficiency, speed, and endurance. He taught her how to use an opponent's strength against them, how to strike at weak points that would disable rather than overpower, and how to think 3 moves ahead in any confrontation. The training was brutal, not because of its physical demands, but because it required Zara to completely reimagine her understanding of strength. Every instinct her culture had programmed into her screamed that she was doing things wrong, that real warriors didn't need tricks and tactics. But gradually, she began to see results. The breakthrough came during their third week together. Marcus had set up a training scenario in a rocky canyon about 5 miles from the cabin. He had hidden supplies throughout the area and tasked Zara with retrieving them while he played the role of a pursuing enemy. "Remember," he called out as she prepared to begin, "this isn't about fighting me. It's about completing the mission despite my interference." Zara nodded, her breathing steady despite the challenging terrain ahead. Over the past weeks, her lung capacity had improved significantly, and she had learned to manage her energy more efficiently. The chase began at dawn. Marcus gave her a 10-minute head start, then began hunting her through the canyon using every tracking skill he possessed. For 2 hours they played a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rocks and sparse vegetation. But something had changed. Where the old Zara would have panicked and exhausted herself quickly, this version moved with calculated precision. She used the terrain to her advantage, doubling back on her own trail, using water to mask her scent, and choosing routes that would be difficult for a larger pursuer to follow. When Marcus finally cornered her near the canyon's end, he expected the exercise to be over. Instead, Zara surprised him by using a technique he had taught her weeks earlier, redirecting his momentum and slipping past him with fluid grace. By the time the exercise ended, she had successfully retrieved all the hidden supplies and evaded capture for over 6 hours. More importantly, she had done it all while maintaining the calm, analytical mindset of a true strategist. That evening, as they sat around a campfire in the canyon, Marcus saw something in Zara's eyes that hadn't been there before. Confidence. Not the false bravado of someone trying to prove themselves, but the quiet assurance of someone who knew their own capabilities. "I felt different today," she said, staring into the flames. "For the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt efficient." Marcus smiled. "That's because you're finally starting to understand what real strength looks like. Your people have been measuring the wrong things, Zara. They've been so focused on raw power that they've forgotten the most important lesson in warfare. Which is, the strongest warrior isn't the one who can lift the heaviest weight or defeat the most opponents in single combat. The strongest warrior is the one who's still standing when everyone else has fallen." As the fire crackled between them, Zara felt something shift inside her mind. The shame and inadequacy that had defined her entire life began to fade, replaced by a growing understanding of her own unique capabilities. She wasn't weak. She had simply been playing by the wrong rules. The training continued for another month, each day building upon the previous one's lessons. Marcus taught her advanced tactics, strategic thinking, and the psychological aspects of leadership. He showed her how to inspire loyalty through competence rather than fear, how to make difficult decisions with incomplete information, and how to turn apparent disadvantages into unexpected strengths. But perhaps most importantly, he taught her to see herself not as a failed Vorthon warrior, but as something entirely new. A hybrid of human cunning and alien nobility that could revolutionize how her people thought about leadership. By the time the training camp ended, Princess Zara had been transformed in ways that went far beyond the physical. She moved with quiet confidence, spoke with measured authority, and approached problems with the methodical precision of a master strategist. The weak princess who had arrived on Earth 2 months earlier was gone, replaced by something the galaxy had never seen before. A warrior philosopher who understood that true strength came not from the body, but from the mind that directed it. As they prepared to return to Vorthon Prime, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and concern. He had given Zara the tools she needed to succeed, but ultimately, she would have to prove herself to her own people. The real test was still to come. The warrior's return. The royal docking bay of Vorthon Prime had never seemed so imposing to Princess Zara as it did on the day of her return. The massive chamber, carved from living crystal and capable of housing a dozen warships, buzzed with activity as news of her arrival spread throughout the capital. But this time, the whispers that followed her weren't filled with pity or disappointment. They were filled with curiosity and something that might have been hope. King Theron waited at the center of the bay, flanked by the Council of Elders and a full honor guard. His massive form was as imposing as ever, but Zara could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his amber eyes. He was afraid, not of her failure, but of what her success might mean for their people's understanding of strength itself. As the transport ship's ramp lowered, Zara emerged with Marcus Reed beside her. The difference in her appearance was immediately obvious to everyone present. Where before she had moved with the hesitant steps of someone constantly battling gravity and her own limitations, now she walked with fluid precision. Her posture was straight but relaxed, her movements economical and purposeful. But it was her eyes that truly marked the transformation. Gone was the defeated acceptance of weakness that had defined her youth. In its place burned the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered their true nature and was no longer afraid of it. "Father," she said, approaching the king with measured steps. Her voice carried easily across the vast chamber, no longer the barely audible whisper of the girl who had left months earlier. Theron studied his daughter carefully, noting the subtle changes in her bearing, the way she seemed to take up more space despite no increase in her physical size. "You look different, my daughter." "I am different," Zara replied simply, "but perhaps not in the way you expected." Elder Crick stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "Princess, we have received reports of your training, but the Council remains concerned about your readiness for the trials of strength. Have you gained the physical power necessary to— Elder Crix, Zara interrupted gently but with unmistakable authority. I have not gained physical power in the way our people traditionally measure it. I have gained something far more valuable, the knowledge of how to use what I have effectively. The assembled crowd murmured at this unexpected response. Marcus observed the proceedings with interest, noting how Zara had immediately redirected the conversation away from their preconceptions and toward her actual capabilities. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bay. Emergency lights bathed the crystal walls in pulsing red as an aide rushed toward the king with obvious urgency. Your Majesty, the aide gasped, barely maintaining protocol in his haste. Long-range sensors have confirmed our worst fears. The Dominion fleet is approaching our outer system. They'll reach Vorthon Prime within 6 hours. The blood drained from Theron's face. The Dominion was their most ancient enemy, a coalition of warrior races that had coveted the Vorthon homeworld for generations. Their fleets were vast, their soldiers bred for combat, and their technology rivaled anything the Vorthon Empire could field. How many ships? Theron demanded. Over 300, Your Majesty. It's the largest invasion force we've ever detected. Panic began to spread through the crowd. 300 ships represented more firepower than Vorthon Prime's defenses could handle, even with their entire fleet committed to the battle. This wasn't just an invasion, it was an extinction event. Elder Voss stepped forward, his voice urgent. Your Majesty, we must evacuate the royal family and government immediately. The outer colonies can— No. Zara's voice cut through the rising chaos like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward her as she stepped into the center of the group. We don't run. We fight. Princess, Elder Crix said, his tone patronizing despite the crisis. This is not a matter for theoretical discussions about strength. This is real warfare against impossible odds. Zara's eyes met his steadily. Exactly. And impossible odds are where human tactics prove most valuable. Zara's eyes met his steadily. Exactly. And impossible odds are where human tactics prove most valuable. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. For generations, our people have measured strength by individual combat prowess. We have built our military doctrine around the idea that superior force will always triumph. But what happens when we face an enemy with superior force? The question hung in the air as everyone present contemplated its implications. Marcus stepped forward, understanding that this was Zara's moment to prove everything she had learned. Your Majesty, Princess Zara has spent months studying human military history and strategy. She has insights that could make the difference between victory and defeat. Theron looked between his daughter and the human trainer, desperation warring with hope in his expression. What do you propose? Zara moved to the chamber's central display, calling up a holographic representation of the Vorthon system. The Dominion expects us to meet them in direct battle, fleet against fleet. That's what we've always done, and it's why they've brought overwhelming numbers. They want to win through superior force. She manipulated the display, showing the approaching enemy fleet and Vorthon Prime's defensive positions. But what if we don't give them the battle they expect? What if we use their expectations against them? Explain, Theron commanded, his full attention now focused on his daughter. The Dominion fleet is powerful but massive. That makes it slow to maneuver and difficult to coordinate. They're approaching in a standard battle formation because they assume we'll try to match them ship for ship. Zara's fingers danced over the controls, highlighting key points in the system. Instead, we divide our forces into small, fast-moving units. We hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, and force them to spread out to hunt us. Elder Crix scoffed. That's nothing but delaying tactics. Eventually, they'll overwhelm our scattered forces. Will they? Zara asked, calling up historical data from Earth's military archives. Human history is filled with examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through superior tactics. The key is not to fight the enemy's strengths, but to exploit their weaknesses. She highlighted several battle scenarios, showing how human commanders had used terrain, timing, and misdirection to achieve victory against overwhelming odds. The assembled Vorthon leaders watched in fascination as she broke down complex strategies into understandable components. The Dominion's greatest weakness is their reliance on centralized command and control, Zara continued. Their fleet commanders are used to direct, honorable combat. They've never faced an enemy willing to use unconventional tactics. Marcus nodded approvingly. Your daughter has learned to think like a human general, Your Majesty, and human generals specialize in winning unwinnable wars. For several long moments, King Theron studied the strategic projections his daughter had created. Around him, the Council of Elders murmured among themselves, clearly struggling with concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Finally, Theron spoke. "Very well. Princess Zara, you will coordinate our defensive strategy. All fleet commanders will report to you." The decision sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. The weak princess, the girl who couldn't even lift ceremonial weapons, was being placed in command of their planet's defense against the greatest threat in their history. But as Zara began issuing orders with calm precision, something remarkable happened. The panic that had gripped the crowd began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of purpose and determination. Her confidence was infectious, her strategic vision clear and logical. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Zara coordinated with fleet commanders, repositioned defensive platforms, and set up the complex web of feints and misdirections that would form the core of their strategy. She didn't try to be the warrior her people expected. Instead, she became something entirely new. A strategic mastermind who could see patterns and possibilities that others missed. When the Dominion fleet finally reached Vorthon Prime, they found not the direct confrontation they expected, but a carefully orchestrated chaos that seemed to attack them from every direction at once. Small Vorthon squadrons appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking at support vessels and communication arrays before vanishing into the system's asteroid fields. The battle raged for 18 hours, but it wasn't the glorious combat the Dominion had anticipated. Instead, it was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, with each Dominion advantage systematically neutralized by tactics they had never encountered before. In the end, the superior numbers meant nothing. Confused, scattered, and unable to coordinate their overwhelming firepower effectively, the Dominion fleet found itself fighting a dozen separate battles instead of one decisive engagement. By the time their commanders realized what was happening, it was too late. The retreat began on the battle's second day, with Dominion forces fleeing in disorder toward the outer system. They had come expecting an easy victory through superior force and instead found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn by an enemy they had never learned to fight. As news of the victory spread throughout Vorthon Prime, the celebration was unlike anything in the planet's history. But for Zara, the real triumph wasn't the military victory. It was the moment she saw recognition and respect in her people's eyes. "You have saved our world," King Theron said, as they stood together on the palace balcony, watching the celebration below. "But more than that, you have changed how we think about strength itself." Zara smiled, feeling the weight of destiny finally settling comfortably on her shoulders. "I learned something important during my training, Father. True strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being able to bend without breaking, to adapt and overcome no matter what challenges arise." In the months that followed, Princess Zara's victory became legend throughout the galaxy. The story of the weak Vorthon princess who had learned human tactics and defeated an impossible enemy inspired other species to reconsider their own assumptions about power and leadership. But perhaps most importantly, it marked the beginning of a new era of cooperation between humans and aliens, built on the understanding that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what makes us different, but from what we can learn from each other. The Glass Princess had indeed proven unbreakable, not through force but through wisdom, strategy, and the indomitable spirit that defined the very best of both human and alien nature.